It was a cold evening in late November, the kind of night when the world seems quieter than usual. The roads stretched empty beneath the soft glow of passing streetlights, and the air outside was thick with the bite of winter. He was driving, home after another long day at work, the hum of his old truck filling the silence. The heater barely worked and his hands were rough from the week's labor. He had been thinking about life a lot lately, how nothing seemed to be going as planned. Every day felt the same. He worked, came home, ate alone, and went to bed. The bills stacked up faster than his paychecks, and the sense of being stuck weighed on him heavier with each passing month. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing that good things could still happen to him. The radio crackled quietly, a soft tune playing in the background. His eyes were tired, but he kept driving, thinking only of his bed. The road ahead was empty, lined with trees swaying gently in the cold wind. Then, through the haze of his headlights, he saw it, a car parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly in the dark. He slowed down instinctively. For a moment he hesitated. It was late and the area wasn't exactly safe. Anyone could be out there, a thief, a trick, or worse. Part of him wanted to keep going, to just drive past and forget it. "It's not your problem," he muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. But as he drew closer, the faint figure of someone standing beside the car came into view. The person looked cold and helpless, waving one arm for attention. Something inside him stirred, that small, quiet part of his heart that still cared about people despite everything. He sighed, slowed his truck and pulled over a few feet ahead. As he stepped out, the chill hit him hard. The night air bit through his jacket, and his breath fogged in the air. The stranger, an older man in a worn coat, looked both relieved and nervous. His car hood was up and steam rose faintly from the engine. "Everything all right?" he asked cautiously. The man shook his head. "Battery's dead, I think. Been out here almost an hour. No one stopped." He glanced around. The road was empty in both directions. He could imagine how lonely it must have felt standing there in the dark, waiting for help that never came. Without saying much else, he opened the hood further and looked inside. The cables were old, the battery weak. He grabbed his jumper cables from the truck and got to work. As they hooked everything up, the older man tried to make conversation. He said he was driving home from visiting his sister in a nearby town. The car had started smoking suddenly, and then just died. He didn't have a signal on his phone and had been stuck for a long time before help arrived. When the engine finally turned over again, the relief on the man's face was pure gratitude. He clapped his hands together, smiling in disbelief. "You have no idea how much this means to me," he said, his voice shaky with emotion. He just shrugged. "It's no big deal, I'm glad it started." The stranger paused, looking at him thoughtfully. "You could have just kept driving," he said. "Most people would have." "Maybe," he replied, glancing down at the ground. "But something told me not to." They shared a small laugh, the kind of moment that felt simple but meaningful. Before parting ways, the man asked for his name and shook his hand firmly. "You never know how far one good act can take you," he said before climbing back into his car. He smiled faintly and watched as the car disappeared into the distance. The night was quiet again, the road empty. For a long moment he stood there beside his truck, feeling strangely awake inside. He didn't know why, but something about that encounter lingered with him long after he got back into his seat. As he drove home, the streetlights seemed brighter. The loneliness he'd been carrying all this time felt just a little lighter. That night, when he finally got home, the small apartment felt different. Not warmer, but not as cold either. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about what the stranger had said. You never know how far one good act can take you. He couldn't explain it, but those words echoed in his mind like a quiet promise. Days passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. He went back to work, came home, and tried to make ends meet. But something had changed in the way he saw people. He found himself noticing little things: the tired cashier at the store, the neighbor struggling with groceries, the delivery driver out in the cold. He began offering help more often, not because he expected anything, but because it simply felt right. Then, one morning, he received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. Hesitant, he answered. "Is this the man who helped me with my car the other night?" a familiar voice asked. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, that's me." "This might sound odd," the man continued, "but I'd really like to thank you properly. You saved me that night. Would you be free for lunch sometime?" He almost said no out of habit. He wasn't used to people going out of their way for him. But something about the sincerity in the man's voice made him pause. "Sure," he said finally. "I guess I could do that." They met at a small diner downtown the next afternoon. The man was already seated when he arrived, waving him over with a warm smile. The conversation started casual, small talk, laughter, stories about the night on the road. Then the man began to talk about his work. He ran a small community program that helped people who had fallen on hard times, those who needed second chances. It wasn't just charity. It was about teaching skills, rebuilding lives, and giving hope where it was fading. The more he listened, the more it resonated with him. The older man explained how the world could change if people just gave others one more chance, the same way he had been given one long ago. Finally, the man leaned forward and said, "I could use someone like you in my program. Someone who doesn't just talk about kindness but lives it. Ever thought about doing something different?" He blinked in surprise. "Me? I don't know much about helping others. I just fixed your car." The man laughed. "That's where it starts. One small act. It's not about what you know. It's about what you're willing to do." He didn't know what to say. The offer felt too sudden, too strange. But there was something honest about it. For the first time in a long time, someone saw potential in him, not as a worker but as a person. When they left the diner that day, he carried more than a full stomach. He carried a thought that wouldn't leave his mind. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to start over. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he couldn't help replaying the conversation in his head. Life had been a long road of missed chances and quiet disappointments. But maybe this was different. Maybe stopping that night hadn't been random at all. He thought about how he almost kept driving, how he almost ignored the blinking hazard lights. If he had, none of this would have happened. He wouldn't have met the man. He wouldn't have been offered this strange, hopeful opportunity. It made him realize how one small decision, one single choice to do the right thing, and could change everything. Before falling asleep, he whispered quietly to himself, "You never know how far one good act can take you." And in that moment, for the first time in years, he felt something stirring deep inside. Hope. The following days passed in a blur of thoughts he couldn't shake off. Every time he sat down after work, his mind wandered back to that conversation in the diner. The man's offer still echoed inside him. It wasn't something he had expected, and truthfully, he didn't even know if he believed in chances anymore. Life had taught him that promises often faded faster than the warmth of a handshake. Yet somehow this felt different. He had been doing the same kind of work for years, fixing things, lifting things, repeating the same tasks day after day. There was comfort in routine, but also emptiness. He often felt like he was standing still while the world kept moving ahead without him. Now someone had given him an option he never thought he'd have, a chance to be part of something that mattered. For several nights he stayed up late thinking about it. The apartment around him was quiet except for the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall. The only light came from a small lamp beside his chair. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if he was capable of change. Could he really help others when he barely knew how to help himself? Eventually he decided to visit the community center the man had mentioned. It was on the edge of town, tucked between a row of small shops and an abandoned warehouse. From the outside, it didn't look like much, just a modest building with faded paint and a small sign near the door. But inside, he found a space filled with life. There were people of all ages moving about, some cleaning, some fixing furniture, others helping with boxes of food and clothes. The air was filled with the smell of coffee, and the sound of laughter mixed with quiet determination. The man spotted him near the entrance and walked over with a smile that felt genuine. "You came," he said warmly, patting his shoulder. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I wasn't sure either," he admitted. They sat down in a small office in the back. The room was simple: a desk, a few chairs, and photos on the wall showing people smiling, shaking hands, and rebuilding their lives. The man explained more about the program, how they helped those who had lost jobs, homes, or families. Some were trying to recover from hard times. Others were just looking for a new start. "What we do here isn't about handouts," the man said. "It's about hope. People come here to remember that they still matter." The words struck him deeply. For years he had been living quietly, keeping to himself, never expecting more than what was necessary to get by. Hearing someone talk about hope in such a simple, honest way stirred something inside him. The man continued, "You don't need to be perfect to help. You just need to care. And from what I've seen, you already do." He looked down, unsure how to respond. No one had ever told him that before. They walked through the center together. The man introduced him to others, explaining how each person played a small role in keeping things running. Some handled repairs. Others delivered supplies. Some taught skills to those trying to get back on their feet. There was a sense of purpose in the air, something he hadn't felt in a long time. At the end of the tour, the man said, "You can start small if you like. Maybe help with repairs or lend a hand in the kitchen. See how it feels." He nodded slowly. "I can do that," so he did. At first it was just a few hours after work, fixing broken chairs, mending shelves, patching up walls. But over time, those hours turned into days. He found himself staying longer, talking to people, listening to their stories. One afternoon, while he was repairing a leaky sink, a young boy approached him. The child couldn't have been older than 10, holding a small wooden toy car missing a wheel. "Can you fix it?" the boy asked shyly. He took the toy, examining it carefully. The wheel had broken off, but it wasn't hard to fix. He glued it back in place, sanded the edges, and handed it back. The boy's face lit up as if he had just been given the world. "Thank you," he said, running off to show his mother. That small moment stayed with him. It wasn't about the toy. It was about what it represented, something simple yet meaningful. He realized he hadn't felt that kind of satisfaction in years. Day by day, the community center became part of his life. The people there welcomed him as one of their own. They didn't ask about his past or judge him for what he didn't have. Instead, they focused on what they could build together. One evening, after everyone had gone home, he stayed behind to lock up. As he walked through the quiet hall, he noticed a framed quote on the wall. It read, "Kindness is the beginning of change." He stood there for a while, staring at it. Those words summed up everything he had been feeling lately. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. For the first time in years, he felt excited about the day ahead. The center had planned a small event for families in need, free meals, clothing, and winter supplies. He volunteered to help with the setup. The air buzzed with energy as people filled the hall. Laughter echoed, children played, and volunteers moved quickly to serve everyone. Watching it all, he couldn't help but smile. The man caught his eye from across the room and gave him a thumbs up. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Later that day, when things quieted down, an older woman approached him. She thanked him for helping organize the food tables. "You have no idea how much this means," she said softly. "It's been a hard year for many of us." He nodded, humbled by her words. It wasn't that he had done anything extraordinary. He had just shown up, worked hard, and cared. Yet that simple act seemed to ripple outward in ways he couldn't fully understand. Weeks turned into months, and his life began to shift quietly. The loneliness that had once filled his evenings started to fade. He laughed more, talked more, and felt connected in a way he hadn't felt in years. Helping others gave him a sense of belonging he didn't know he was missing. One evening, the man invited him to sit down after everyone had left. "You've done a lot here," he said. "People notice your effort. You've changed more lives than you realize," he smiled faintly. "I think it's me who's changed the most." The man nodded knowingly. "That's how it works. When you give to others, you end up giving something back to yourself." They sat in silence for a while. Then the man said something that stayed with him long after that night. "You might not see it now, but I think this is just the beginning for you. There's more ahead. You just have to keep walking." As he walked home later, the city lights flickered in the distance. The cold air brushed against his face, but instead of feeling lonely, he felt alive. For the first time, he wasn't just existing. He was part of something that mattered. At home, he poured himself a cup of tea and sat by the window watching the world outside. He thought about how strange life could be, how one small decision, like stopping for a stranger on a dark road, had led him here. He remembered that night clearly. The blinking hazard lights, the quiet road, the hesitant choice to stop. If he had kept driving, none of this would have happened. He wouldn't have found the community center, the people, or the new sense of purpose filling his days. It amazed him how one act of kindness could change the course of an entire life. Before bed, he found himself writing a few words in an old notebook he had lying around. It wasn't something he usually did, but he felt the need to put his thoughts down. On the first page, he wrote, "Kindness isn't weakness. It's the start of everything good." He closed the notebook and smiled. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of it. The next morning, as he headed to the community center, the winter sun peeked through the clouds. The world seemed brighter, and so did he. He didn't realize it yet, but this was only the beginning of where that single act of kindness would lead him. The months that followed brought new beginnings he never saw coming. Every morning felt different now. The days no longer blended together in dull silence. There was energy in his steps, purpose in his routine, and a quiet joy in knowing that his presence made a difference somewhere. He had become one of the most dependable volunteers at the community center. Whenever something broke, everyone knew who to call. He didn't just fix walls or chairs. He listened, talked, and cared. People came to him not only for repairs, but for advice or just a comforting presence. One afternoon, as he was repairing a broken window frame, the man from the diner, the one who had brought him into this world of service, walked up with a small envelope in his hand. "I have something for you," he said, handing it over. Inside was a letter of appreciation from the local council, recognizing the volunteers who had helped restore the center. His name was listed among them. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. It wasn't about recognition, he never wanted any. But seeing his name printed there stirred something in him. It was proof that he mattered again. The man smiled at his expression. "You've earned it," he said. "You've done more here than most realize." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. "I just did what anyone would," he replied. But deep down he knew not everyone would have stopped that night, and not everyone would have stayed. Later that week, a new volunteer joined the center. She was quiet, with eyes that carried a certain sadness. She rarely spoke, often keeping to herself, and it was clear she was carrying a story she wasn't ready to share. But there was something about her that drew people in, a calm strength hidden behind her silence. One evening, while sorting boxes in the storage room, he noticed her struggling to lift a heavy crate. He quickly stepped in. "Here, let me help," he said gently. She nodded in thanks but didn't say much. As they worked side by side, he tried to make small talk. "First time here?" he asked. She nodded again. "Yes, just needed something to do," he smiled. "I know that feeling." Over the next few days, he saw her more often. She always arrived early and stayed late, helping with whatever task needed doing. Slowly, they began to talk more, not about big things but about small moments, the weather, the people, the laughter they overheard around them. Bit by bit, she opened up. One night, after everyone had gone home, they stayed behind to clean up the hall. The soft hum of the lights filled the quiet space. She finally spoke about what had brought her there. "I lost someone close to me," she said quietly, her hands still busy folding chairs. "I didn't know what to do with myself after that. I thought helping others might help me breathe again." He listened carefully, not interrupting. He understood that kind of loss, the kind that leaves an emptiness no words can fill. After a long silence, he said softly, "I used to feel like that too, like life had moved on and left me behind. But coming here, it changes you." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "Maybe that's what I'm hoping for." They didn't talk much more that night, but something had shifted between them. An unspoken understanding, a quiet bond built from shared pain and slow healing. In the weeks that followed, they worked closely together on several projects. Whether it was fixing old tables or sorting donations, they found comfort in each other's company. It wasn't about romance or anything dramatic. It was about connection. Two people finding light in the same place of kindness. One day, the man from the diner called them both into his office. "I've got something new in mind," he said with a grin. "We're planning to expand. Maybe set up a small outreach program for nearby towns. I need someone to help coordinate it." They exchanged a quick glance before the man continued. "You two have shown real heart here. I think you'd make a great team." The idea scared him at first. He wasn't used to being in charge of anything. But the thought of helping more people, of taking what they'd built and spreading it further, filled him with pride. They accepted. The following months were full of hard work. They traveled to nearby neighborhoods, talking to families, setting up small drives, repairing what they could, and building trust one smile at a time. It wasn't easy. Some days were exhausting. The van they used broke down more than once. The weather didn't always cooperate, and there were moments of doubt. But every challenge made them stronger. One particular evening stood out. They were in a small town miles away, setting up tables for a food drive when heavy rain began to pour. The volunteers scattered, trying to cover the supplies, but the wind made it nearly impossible. He ran to hold down a tent pole, his clothes drenched within minutes. She ran beside him, helping keep things from blowing away. Amid the chaos, she laughed, a full, honest laugh that cut through the noise of the storm. He looked at her, surprised, and couldn't help but laugh too. When the rain finally eased, they stood under the tent, soaked to the bone, looking at the mess around them. Yet somehow it didn't feel like a failure. They had saved most of the supplies, and the families still came despite the storm. Later that night, as they sat in the van waiting for the engine to warm up, she looked out the window and said quietly, "You know, I think this is the first time I've felt alive in a long while." He turned to her and smiled. "Yeah, me too." They didn't need to say more. That night, as they drove back to the city, the world outside the van felt softer, the roads shimmering under the moonlight, the air cool and calm. He glanced at her, resting her head against the window, eyes half closed. There was peace on her face, and it reminded him of how far both of them had come. When they returned to the center the next day, the man greeted them with warm applause. "You two did great," he said proudly. "You're building something real out there." They thanked him, but deep down he knew this wasn't about praise. It was about purpose, about rediscovering what it meant to live for something beyond yourself. One weekend, the community center hosted a gathering for all the volunteers and families they had helped. The hall was filled with laughter, music, and stories being shared. He stood quietly near the back, watching the room fill with warmth. The woman approached him, handing him a plate of food. "You should eat," she said with a small smile. He took it, still looking around. "I was just thinking," he said. "A few months ago I didn't even know this place existed. And now, I can't imagine my life without it." She nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How life brings you exactly where you need to be, even if you don't realize it at first." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you think that's destiny?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just kindness leading us home." That night, as the event came to an end, the man from the diner stood up to give a small speech. He thanked everyone for their hard work, their compassion, and their belief in second chances. Then, to his surprise, he called him and the woman up front. "These two," he said proudly, "remind us all that one act of kindness can change not just one life, but many." The crowd clapped warmly, and he felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to attention, but standing there beside her, he realized something important. He wasn't just helping others anymore. He was rebuilding his own heart piece by piece. As the evening wound down, people began to leave, hugging, laughing, and promising to meet again soon. He stayed behind to help clean up. The woman joined him, sweeping the floor quietly. When they finished, he looked at her and said softly, "You know, I never planned any of this. I just stopped to help someone one night." She smiled. "And maybe that's all it takes. One small choice to do something good." He nodded slowly. "Funny how that one moment led me here." Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. They walked together toward the parking lot, not saying much. There was no need for words anymore. He looked up at the sky, the same sky that had watched him that night when everything began. Only now he didn't feel lost under it. He felt found. The journey that had started with a single act of kindness had become something much greater, a path toward healing, connection, and purpose. And though he didn't know where life would lead next, one thing was certain. He would never ignore a stranger's cry for help again, because sometimes when you stop for someone else, you end up saving yourself too. The following months brought quiet changes. Life at the community center became busier as more people joined the outreach program. What began as a small effort had grown into something beautiful. People from different walks of life working together to bring hope where it was needed most. He had never seen himself as a leader, yet somehow everyone looked to him when things needed organizing. His calm nature and gentle way with people made others trust him easily. Even when situations got messy, he had a way of keeping everyone grounded. One morning, the woman he worked closely with rushed in holding a newspaper. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Look at this," she said, pointing at the front page. The local paper had written a story about their outreach program. There was a photo of them standing beside the van, smiling despite their tired faces. The headline read, "Local volunteers bring change and hope across communities." He couldn't believe it. "They wrote about us?" he asked, still processing it. She nodded, her smile wide. "They did. People are starting to notice." For a moment, he felt a mixture of pride and disbelief. He remembered the night months ago when he had stopped his car for a stranger on the road. How uncertain and lost he had felt. Now that one moment had led him here, surrounded by purpose and people who believed in what they were doing. Soon, calls began coming in from nearby towns. Some wanted to donate, others wanted to volunteer. The team expanded, and suddenly their small group had grown into something bigger than any of them had imagined. But with growth came new challenges. They needed more funds, more organization, and more hands to keep everything running smoothly. There were long nights of planning, sorting, and problem-solving. He often stayed late, sitting in the quiet hall after everyone had gone home, looking at the wall filled with photos of their work. Families smiling, children playing, old buildings restored. Sometimes he would close his eyes and think of how it all began. The cold night, the broken-down car, and the man he had stopped to help. It still amazed him how life could change from such a small decision. One evening, the woman found him sitting alone at one of the tables, lost in thought. "You look tired," she said softly, pulling up a chair beside him. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how far we've come." She looked at the wall, too. "It's strange, isn't it? How something that started from a simple act turned into this." He nodded. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stopped that night." "Maybe someone else would have," she said thoughtfully. "But maybe not. Maybe it was supposed to be you." He looked at her, and for a brief moment he saw the truth in her words. Maybe life really did have a way of leading people where they were meant to go. In the following weeks, they began working on their biggest project yet, rebuilding a small community library that had been abandoned for years. It was a huge task, and many thought it couldn't be done, but they refused to give up. Day after day, they worked tirelessly. The old walls were cleaned, the floors repaired, and the shelves restored. Local children began visiting, curious about what was happening. Some even joined in to help paint and clean. Watching the children laugh and play in a space that had once been forgotten filled him with warmth. He realized that kindness had a ripple effect. One small act could spread further than anyone could predict. During one of those long afternoons, a man in a suit came to visit the site. He introduced himself as a representative from a local foundation. "We've been hearing about your work," he said with a friendly smile. "We'd like to help fund your next project." The woman gasped softly, her hands covering her mouth. He just stood there, speechless. The man continued, "Your story inspired many of us. It's rare to see people doing so much with so little. We want to be part of it." That day marked a turning point. With new support and resources, their work expanded rapidly. They were able to reach more people, fix more homes, and create more spaces of hope. But with every success came reflection. Late at night, when everything went quiet, he often thought about his past, the mistakes, the loneliness, the years he had spent feeling disconnected from the world. He remembered the stranger he had helped that night, the one whose car had broken down. He hadn't seen him in months. They had kept in touch briefly after that first encounter, but life got busy, and messages became less frequent. Something inside him told him it was time to find him again. Not because he owed anything, but because it felt right. That stranger had unknowingly changed his path, and he wanted to thank him properly. He decided to track him down. After some searching, he found an old number and called it. To his surprise, the man answered. His voice was the same, warm and full of life. "I was wondering when you'd call," the man said with a chuckle. "I've been following your work. You've made quite an impact." He laughed softly. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Maybe not," the man replied. "But I didn't do much. You chose to care. That's all it takes sometimes. One choice." They met the following week at the same diner where it all began. The sight of the familiar booths and the smell of fresh coffee brought back memories. When the man walked in, they hugged warmly. Time had passed, but the connection between them felt just as genuine as that first day. "I can't thank you enough," he said sincerely. "If you hadn't stopped that night, I don't know where I'd be." The man smiled, shaking his head. "You don't owe me anything. You found your own path. I just happened to be standing there when it started." They talked for hours, catching up, sharing stories, and laughing about how unpredictable life could be. Before they parted ways, the man said something that stayed with him. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "The world needs more people like you. But don't forget, kindness isn't about saving everyone. It's about showing up even when you think it won't matter." He nodded, those words settling deep in his heart. When he returned to the community center, he shared the story with the woman. She listened quietly, then said, "It's strange how people cross paths, isn't it? Sometimes they stay, sometimes they just pass through, but they always leave something behind." He smiled. "Yes, and sometimes they leave behind a whole new purpose." A few days later, the library project was finally completed. On the opening day, families and children filled the space. The air buzzed with laughter and excitement. Books lined the freshly painted shelves and bright sunlight poured through the windows. Standing at the entrance, watching it all unfold, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was more than just a building. It was a symbol of what kindness could build. As he looked around, his eyes met the woman's. She smiled at him across the room, holding a tray of cookies for the children. It was a simple moment, but it said everything. They had built this together, piece by piece, day by day. Later that evening, after everyone had left, they sat on the library steps as the sun set in the distance. The golden light stretched across the quiet street, bathing everything in warmth. She leaned back, looking at the sky. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked softly. He thought for a moment. "I used to think life was about finding the next big thing. A better job, more success, more everything. But now I think it's just about finding peace where you are, doing what feels right." She nodded. "That sounds about right." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors. There was no need for big words. The peace they both felt spoke louder than anything. That night, as he drove home, he couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, he felt complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because he had learned something important. True fulfillment doesn't come from what you have, but from what you give. And as the city lights faded behind him, he realized something even deeper. He hadn't just walked into his destiny the night he stopped for that stranger. He had walked into a life of meaning, a life built not on chance but on compassion. He knew there were still challenges ahead, still people to help, still roads to travel. But whatever came next, he was ready. Because now he understood that every act of kindness carries its own destiny, and every stranger might just be the beginning of something beautiful. Months passed after the library's opening, but the feeling of that day stayed fresh in everyone's hearts. The small town seemed brighter somehow, more alive. The laughter of children could be heard outside the library every afternoon, and the sound of pages turning had become a gentle background rhythm to the days. He often stopped by the library on his way to work, sometimes helping to restock shelves, sometimes just watching quietly from a corner. Seeing the place full of life gave him a kind of peace he never used to feel. But even though things were going well, there was something quietly stirring inside him. A thought, a pull toward something more. The work they had done had changed so many lives, but he felt there were still people out there who needed help, people he hadn't reached yet. One evening, as he was locking up the center, the woman walked in holding a small box. "You're still here?" she asked with a smile. He chuckled. "Yeah, just finishing up." She handed him the box. "Open it," she said. Inside was a photo album. Pictures from the library opening, the volunteers at work, the first outreach drive, and the early days when they had little more than a van and a handful of people. On the last page was a picture of him standing in front of the library with children all around him. He looked up, touched. "You made this?" She nodded. "I thought you should have something to remind you of what you started." He smiled, his voice soft. "We started it." She paused, looking at him carefully. "I think you're about to start something new again, aren't you?" He raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged lightly. "I've seen that look in your eyes before. You get quiet when you're thinking about something big." He laughed, shaking his head. "You know me too well." "Well," she said with a grin, "if it's something good, I hope you follow it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I will." That night, as he drove home, he thought about all the people who had crossed his path since that one small moment. The stranger he helped, the people who joined him, the lives they touched. And he realized that maybe it was time to take what he had learned and bring it somewhere new. A few weeks later, he called the woman to tell her his plan. He wanted to travel to smaller towns that didn't have community programs and help them start their own. It wouldn't be easy, but he felt ready. She listened quietly on the phone, and when he finished, she said softly, "Then it's time. I'll keep things running here. Go do what you're meant to do." The day he left, the whole team gathered to see him off. They gave him a small backpack filled with supplies, and the woman handed him a folded note. "Don't open it yet," she said. "Save it for when you need it." He promised he would. His first stop was a quiet town by the river, a place that had seen better days. Old shops were boarded up, and many families had moved away in search of work. He met a small group of residents who were trying to keep their community alive but didn't know where to start. He listened to their stories, the struggles, the small hopes, the moments they wanted to rebuild. He told them about his own journey, about how one act of kindness had changed everything. They were inspired. Together they started small, fixing up a rundown playground, repainting walls, cleaning the streets. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years began to work side by side. Slowly, the energy returned to the town. One afternoon, while sitting under a tree watching children play, he finally remembered the folded note in his bag. He opened it carefully. Inside were just a few words. "When things feel heavy, remember why you began. You didn't start this to change the world. You started because you cared." He smiled to himself, reading the line again. It was exactly what he needed to hear. Months turned into a year. He traveled from place to place, helping different communities, guiding them through their own small beginnings. Each town had its own story, its own pain, its own hope. And each time he left behind a piece of himself. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing. People wanting to believe again, wanting to feel connected. And he realized that sometimes people just needed someone to remind them that they still mattered. But there were days when the work felt hard, when exhaustion weighed heavy. Sometimes he wondered if what he was doing truly made a difference. One cold evening, while sitting in a small diner in another town, a young woman approached him shyly. "Are you the man who started the reading project?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "Yes, I guess I am," she smiled nervously. "I just wanted to thank you. My brother joined one of your programs. Before that, he didn't believe he could do much. But now he helps run the community kitchen. He says it gave him a reason to get up again." He was speechless. Her words hit him deeply. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." After she left, he sat there for a while, staring out the window at the snow falling outside. That moment reminded him why he kept going. Not for praise or recognition, but for stories like that. For the quiet changes that no one else might notice. When he eventually returned to the town where everything began, years had passed. The community center had grown. The library was full of people. And the woman still ran things with the same bright energy. She spotted him the moment he walked through the doors. Her face lit up as she rushed over and hugged him tightly. "You're back." He laughed. "I said I'd visit, didn't I?" The place was busier than ever. There were new faces, new programs, and even a small art studio for children. She gave him a tour, proudly pointing out every new project. As they walked through the halls, he noticed a new mural painted on one wall, a painting of hands reaching toward each other, with the words, "One act can change everything." He stopped and stared at it. Feeling his chest tighten, she noticed his reaction. "We painted it last year," she said softly. "It's our reminder of how it all began. He smiled, eyes glistening slightly. It's beautiful. Later that evening, they sat outside the library just like they used to. The town was quiet, the lights from nearby houses glowing softly in the dusk. She turned to him and said, "You've done so much. You've touched lives in ways you may never even know." He shook his head. "We've done it together. You kept this place alive when I was gone. You built the roots while I planted seeds." She smiled. "Maybe that's what life's about. Some of us stay and build, some go and spread the light." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe so." There was a peaceful silence between them, the kind that doesn't need words. After a moment, he said quietly, "You know, I used to think destiny was something big and mysterious, something waiting for you somewhere far away. But now I think destiny is built one small choice at a time." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Like stopping for a stranger." He smiled. "Exactly." The stars began to appear above them, scattered across the deep blue sky. He leaned back, feeling the cool evening air on his face. "I think I finally understand what the stranger meant that night when he said that kindness has a way of finding its way back." She tilted her head. "You think it did?" He looked around, at the library, the town, the people they had helped, the laughter echoing in the distance. "Yes," he said. "It came back 1,000 times over." She nodded, smiling softly. "Then I guess this is where it all comes full circle." He turned toward her, his voice calm but full of feeling. "Maybe, but I don't think it ends here. Kindness doesn't end. It just keeps moving from one person to another." They sat there for a long time, talking, laughing, remembering. The night grew darker, but the warmth between them only deepened. When he finally stood to leave, she said, "Don't be a stranger." He chuckled. "I'll always come back. This will always be home." As he walked away, he glanced back one last time. She was still sitting on the steps, waving at him with that same bright smile. And as he drove off into the night, he thought about everything that had happened. The stranger, the decision to stop, the journey that followed. It all felt like a story written by something bigger than himself. But maybe, he thought, it wasn't fate at all. Maybe it was simply the result of choosing to care, again and again. Because in the end, that was all it ever took to change a life. One act, one moment, one stranger who decided to stop, and that single decision had led him exactly where he was meant to be. Not just into his destiny, but into a life that had meaning.